Okay, well, thank you all for being here today. My name is Matt Friedman. I'm the CEO of the Mekong Club. And today we have a webinar entitled Mitigating Human Trafficking in Airlines and Airports. And I thank you so much for attending this particular event. As part of my opening statement, I'd just like to also say that as we go through this webinar, please feel free to put questions into the chat. At the end, we will have a question and answer session, and this will allow you to ensure that you get all the information you need. Next slide. So I'm going to begin with a story to kind of put into context my feelings related to this particular topic of having airlines and airports be involved. And it goes back to a couple of years ago. My wife and I decided that we were going to do a trip across the United States to do a series of presentations. As it turned out, it lasted 70 consecutive days. We started in Vancouver and ended up in New York City. Now, the interesting thing about this trip is that we went to 24 different cities. We presented to 115 people, and probably about 100 or 15,000 people benefited from what it is that we had to say. But there was something quite interesting that happened. We had, in many of these presentations, often a person come up afterwards and say, listen, you know, I was at that airport and I saw that guy with that girl, or I was at that bus station, or I was at that train station, or I was at that mall, and I saw this situation where, as a parent, it just didn't feel right. That person didn't seem like they were supposed to be with them. And as I was standing there watching this, I didn't really know what to do. And I didn't do anything at all. And I have a certain regret of that. And the interesting thing is I've heard this type of thing all over the world. And what I'm basically saying is that we as kind of observers of the world sometimes find ourselves in a situation where we see things, and we don't know what to do. Next slide. Go one more. Another thing that recently happened is there was a person who contacted me from Canada. She had seen a lot of postings related to, if you see signs of human trafficking, this is what you need to do. And what you see here is an example of some of those signs. You know, if you see a victim, often they're malnourished or show sign of abuse or whatever. And so this woman was out walking her dog, and she saw this 50-year-old Caucasian guy with a 15-year-old girl who looked like she was from First Nations. And as she was observing the relationship between them, it was clear that, you know, they weren't kind of father and daughter. There was just something about it that in her heart and mind signaled that there was a problem here. So being concerned, and because she had been sensitized to the fact that these things happen, she kind of followed them. She took a couple of photographs from behind with her camera. She saw where they were going. She saw where they eventually went back to the apartment building and so forth. And just feeling like she wanted to do her civic duty, she contacted the police. And the police basically said, well, you know, there's not enough information. We don't really know what that is, and we're not going to do anything about it. So she didn't want to give up. She went to a couple of NGOs, and she said the same thing to them. And they said, well, you know, we don't have this, or it could be that, or, and then she finally went to the hotline where she was told that she was supposed to address this. And the hotline basically said, well, you know, we're not equipped to be able to do this. Next slide. So the point I'm making is that, you know, in the first case, the person had no idea what to do. In the second case, they were told that there were certain things you're supposed to do, and they weren't able to get the satisfaction that they needed. Ultimately, what happened, she persisted, she contacted another unit in Canada, and as a result of that, they followed up. But the point of this is to say that we are often told that if you see something, report it. But if you don't understand that procedure and there's no protocol for which you can actually have that happen, it's a problem. So I'm going to stop there and say a few other things and then come back to this important point. Next slide. So as we all know, there's a lot of people in modern slavery around the world. It's 40 million people. These are the statistics we often see. You know, out of the 40 million, 62% or 25 million are in forced labor. And if you break that into component parts, 19% or 4.8 million women and girls are in forced prostitution, and the rest are in forced labor. So we're talking about a large number of people around the world that are in this situation. Now, some of these people are going from one province to another in their country, or from one side of the street or the other, but many of these people are going from one country to another. Next slide. Next slide. And so what we recognize is that as people go from one country to another, they go through airports. According to UNODC, somewhere between 600,000 and 800,000 victims are transported around the world through airports every single day, or not every day, every year, sorry. And as a result of that, we know that there are a lot of victims that if we had those telltale signs, if we knew what to look for, and there was a procedure in place to be able to address it, then perhaps we would be able to intervene so that these people don't make it to the end point. Next slide. This is a kind of a document that's put out by UNODC that looks at the origin and the destination and the countries that have both origin and destination. And you can see that much of the world that has data has people going from one place to another. Next. And another thing is, this is shelter information, a shelter from in the UK, where they describe the locations from where shelter victims come from. I highlighted China and Hong Kong because that's where I am, but look at the locations. You see Jamaica and Cameroon and Turkey and Sudan and Poland. Most of these people, in order to get into the UK to be exploited, had to be on a plane. You know, some of them may be crossed over the border in some other mechanism, but what we're really talking about, and what I'm really trying to drive home here, is the idea that victims move. And victims move through systems and procedures that we have control over, and a lot of them aren't identified. Next. So there are airlines that have been doing this for years, and I'm only going to pick one. There are many others, but I'll pick Delta because I've had most of my kind of direct working relationship with them. You know, they trained 89,000 of their staff. They put aside $2.5 million in order to ensure that their people understood what human trafficking cases look like. They have what's called the Sky Dream program that allows for victims of human trafficking to be sent from one place to another. And the reason why they decided they wanted to do this is because a certain percentage of these people were like those women who came to me when I was doing that road trip and said, listen, I'm in a situation, I see something suspicious, I don't know what to do about it. They told management, and eventually what they did is set up a system and procedure for that to take place. Next slide. Now, every once in a while, we see an example of this getting into the newspapers. This particular example, Sheila Frederick, she was with Alaskan Airlines. She saw a girl with a man. It looked suspicious. She tried to kind of talk to the girl. He answered for her. Finally, I think he fell asleep, and she gave this girl a nod to say, go into the bathroom. When she went in there, there was a note on the wall that says, if you need help, let me know, write something down. The girl did. They reported it to the pilot, and when the plane landed, there was the police there, and they took this trafficker away, and this girl had a happy ending. She eventually went off to the university and so forth. So it demonstrates that a system and procedure with informed people can result in a person basically being able to help a victim of human trafficking. Next slide. And so what we're seeing is that, you know, the airline industry, IATA and Airport Council International, International Tourism Board, and a lot of other airlines are kind of stepping up and looking at this. Part of why this is happening is because of the UK Modern Slavery Act and the Australian Act and the California Transparency Act. You have a situation where airlines are sensitized to the issue. Now, in the past, many of them did not identify kind of training and protocols to be able to address this. But what we're going to be talking about today is the need for that, and how airlines and airports and airline people can be better informed to be able to be part of the solution. And by doing that, they are kind of geared in a way to be able to add value to making the world a better place. So what I'm going to do now is hand it over to Francesca Light. And she's going to talk a little bit about some research that she did for the Mekong Club. And then we're going to give it to Anita and Graham to talk about some specific things that they're working on. With that, thank you very much, and I'll pass it over to you, Francesca.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Matt. So my name is Francesca Light, and I'm a commercial and financial specialist for the Department for Transport in the UK government. However, today I'm here on a personal capacity, not professional. So the views I'm about to share with you today do not reflect the department or the ministers. So I'm here to talk to you, I'm just going to minimize this, there we go. I'm here to talk to you about research I undertook called Combating Human Trafficking in Airlines, Motivations, Obstacles and Solutions in Developing Frontline Staff's Anti-Trafficking Role. So just a quick brief overview of what I'm going to cover. We're going to look at the definition of human trafficking, followed by the researcher's background, purpose and aim, methodology, findings, recommendations, and then finishing with concluding remarks before handing this over to Anita. So there are three elements I want you to remember today. The act, by means of, for the purpose of exploitation. So you put these elements together and you end up with human trafficking. By means of does not apply for people under the age of 18 because legally they're not seen as able to give consent. So human trafficking is relevant to the aviation industry. And although it's proclaimed to be the business of freedom, its convenience and interconnectivity is being misused by traffickers. And with over 1 million passengers in the sky at any given time and over 40 million modern slaves worldwide, then we're potentially looking at big numbers. So why should airlines address human trafficking other than the moral reason? Well, the do-nothing approach is becoming increasingly unattractive. And there's increased action and interest in governments. The UK government are about to publish their first modern slavery statement. There's strengthening anti-slavery legislation, growing consumer and investor awareness, and to top it all off, links between trafficking and terrorism. So with this increasing pressure, then people have turned to frontline staff, as Matt has described. But to do this, a multi-agency approach is essential. So if we were to have a victim on a flight, then as we've heard from Matt, you could have the frontline staff, you've got the captain, maybe air traffic control, police, border force, charities, prosecution. So this is all needed to come together. But these stakeholders are divided on this issue. They have questions about whose responsibility is it? What is the best handling procedure? And many other kind of queries. So is it not asking too much from frontline staff? Aren't border control the normal forefront for customer screening and inspection? And this is really where the research has its purpose. So the research purpose is to reconcile these key stakeholders' attitudes, thoughts, and beliefs under one narrative to determine if there is a consensus on whether frontline staff's anti-trafficking role should be developed to identify and report possible cases of human trafficking on airlines or not. So just a brief look at the methodology of this research. So we're leveraging cross-thematic analysis and using academic theories, but I really want to draw your attention to the interviews. So together, these people had over 200 years of experience in modern slavery and aviation. Unfortunately, some of the interviews could not count towards the analysis due to the length of the interviews. So let's look at the findings. So overall, 4 action inhibitors came out of the research. First of all, we have lack of clarity. So 7 out of 8 subject matter specialists found that the lack of clarity was the main action inhibitor towards frontline staff involvement. And this is because profiling is always seen as grey. Even that word profiling is a bit contentious. And you need that idea of a good cause to suspect. There's also that lack of clarity, as Matt mentioned, around the whole reporting protocol. This was followed by fear and pressure. We've got the 5 out of 8 for both. So that fear, that intimidation, the fear of being wrong, the fear of making a scene, the fear of consequences, the fear of damaging a company's reputation. And then with this, of course, comes that pressure to correctly identify victims, but also this idea that perhaps this pressure is more suited towards law enforcement and not frontline staff. Following up, we do also have that idea of apathy. The idea it's easy to understand why so much effort goes into safety protocols, but human trafficking, not so much. But also the idea that perhaps this will really disrupt frontline staff's routine and that reluctancy to act. So to counteract this, there were 4 action motivators. So all those interviewed were united with the fact that education was absolutely essential if you were to develop frontline staff's role. That increased awareness, understanding of the crime's proximity in nature, the ability to recognize and respond when identifying potential victims. With that, you need that support in place. Frontline staff need to know that if they're going to do this, that their companies support them no matter what. And then you have that protocol is developed and it's consistent. They need to feel engaged. They need to feel emotionally connected with it, that they can make a difference. They need to hate the fact that the crime exists. They need to feel proud that their company is doing something to tackle this crime. And with that comes that empowerment, that confidence, that willingness to listen to that gut instinct that something doesn't quite feel right, and that feeling that they are protecting their passengers. So it's very key to stress that each stakeholder did say that there are complexities and difficulties in developing frontline staff's role. However, the results do show that clearly these obstacles were not seen as insurmountable. It was stressed as well that it has to be considered on an airline-to-airline basis. But if all airlines could come together voluntarily, then that would be the best case scenario. Alternative methods of tackling human trafficking were also strongly encouraged. But overall, 7 out of 8 subject matter specialists decided that frontline staff's anti-trafficking role should be developed to identify and report possible cases of human trafficking on airlines. Now, there was also recommendations that came out of this as well. So, first of all, senior management engagement. It was seen as absolutely crucial for senior management to have a better understanding of the scale and awareness and the proximity of the crime and how their airline could be implicated. It's seen as better to make an informed decision rather than be reactive to blunt and untargeted legislation. This way they can take control of the situation. We also need to develop that protocol. A standardized frontline reporting protocol was seen as the best solution, and this idea of not reinventing the wheel came out as well. We need to educate frontline staff. So to do this, it was suggested that you could bundle the training onto other compulsory e-learning modules. And this way, with regular protocol run-throughs, you can demystify the operational aspects of anti-trafficking reporting and minimize training disruption. You've also got frontline staff engagement, that sense that they need to feel empowered and engaged in order to overcome that fear and that apathy. And when the airline fully supports and takes responsibility for the decisions made, then you're going to achieve that. And of course, you need to measure and monitor the progress. There are a number of quantifiable KPIs, so key performance indicators that did come out of the research. So the idea of the potential victim reporting, tracking the numbers of successful victim identification, but also just measuring the level of staff education and engagement. Now, I want to stress, although on the screen there is a linear diagram in front of you, this is anything but. This is a continuous cycle of learning and improvement as well. So just some concluding remarks. Each airline is unique. However, all airlines being misused by traffickers do have a window of opportunity to disrupt this crime. And 7 out of 8 subject matter experts believed that this could be achieved by leveraging frontline staff's ability to notice when something doesn't look right and report it. But As always in academic research, more research is needed. Is this feeling shared across the wider industry? The next step ideally would be for airlines to convene in a safe environment and to discuss whether, and if so how, to move forwards. But one thing is for sure, if airlines were to come together and develop frontline staff's anti-trafficking role, then the label of the business of freedom will be a label well earned. So I'll now pass you back over to Anita, who will continue with the presentation. So hopefully, yeah, that's it. Over to you.
Good day, everyone. On behalf of Freedomports Alliance, I would like to thank Matt, the Mekong Club, and Francesca for this privilege we have to participate in a much needed discussion. And each of you, thank you for your valuable time to join this conversation. My name is Anita du Plessis, and along with my friend and colleague Haddad, we would like to invite you to unpack the topic of mitigating human trafficking in airlines and airports with us. Freedomports Alliance is a very small team who firmly believes that it is possible to mitigate human trafficking in airlines and airports. In order for us to answer the how-to to this question, let us recall a flight where we were personally stressed, feared missing a flight, or faced the possibility that something could go wrong. An airport is a very emotional place because people are stressed, they're always in a hurry. They're saying their goodbyes, or they are excited to see the people they are waiting for. Moreover, airport operations run on a very tight timeline. Imagine the additional stress traffickers or victims of trafficking experience if we are on hyper alert mode. So much more are those involved in human trafficking and drug trafficking. Moreover, the observant eye can spot the difference between a naturally stressed person and an unnaturally stressed person. This is why we believe it is possible to prevent human trafficking from happening in airlines and airports. Next, please. Jeannie May said, selling the commodity of humans has to be the biggest business out there, as it is the most lucrative. I cannot go to sleep at night unless I know that I'm using all of my platforms to fight human trafficking. This powerful statement grabbed my attention, and we want to encourage you to join us by using all of your platforms to prioritize a proactive anti-human trafficking approach in airlines and airports. To fight human trafficking is much more than a modern slavery policy on a website. It requires action. It requires decision makers to drive the human trafficking fight. As both Matt and Francesca alluded to, it requires of decision makers to be an example of how to implement a proactive anti-trafficking approach for their staff. Next, please. Irrespective of whether someone is involved in drug trafficking or human trafficking, the person is already enslaved. Why do we say that? Because someone exploited the vulnerability of a person desperate for an opportunity to make a living. Because drugs are consumables, drug trafficking requires continuous sourcing and ongoing expenses with marginal profit markup. Whereas human trafficking, on the other hand, is a one-off purchase that allows for ongoing reselling for compound profit. This profit margin is massive. Next, please. When you travel with airlines, do you expect a safe journey? Do you expect cabin crew to be equipped to effectively respond to in-flight emergencies? What about medical emergencies in airports and on board a flight? Do you expect procedures to be in place to safeguard you from a potential terrorist attack? Do you expect COVID-19 protocol to be enforced? Of course, that is precisely what we expect. Why is comprehensive anti-trafficking training then not included in all frontline staff training? Next, please. Why aviation needs anti-trafficking projects is to reduce the risk of fraud, illegal entry, smuggling, etc. A passenger's identity documents, tickets, boarding pass, and supporting documents are checked by multiple airline and airport entities to, number one, verify the passenger and to ensure he or she meets the requirements to check in, pass through security, and is clear to board. Baggage is screened for dangerous goods and prohibited items to reduce the risk of danger or threat. The quantity and type of luggage could reveal trafficking indicators. It is therefore crucial that those who screen luggage should know the trafficking indicators related to baggage screening. When we consider continuity, annually the Trafficking in Persons report recommends the updating of and the implementation of operational procedures that empowers frontline staff to proactively identify human trafficking and respond to it effectively. When we talk about safety, passenger screening reduces the risk of threat to the safety of airports and airlines. And therefore, we recommend that it should include human trafficking indicator screening as well. Next, please. So who is Freedomports Alliance? Sorry, the screen. Next slide, please.
No.
Yeah, thank you. So who is Freedomports Alliance? Freedomports Alliance, can you just go back to the previous screen, please? Freedomports Alliance exists to equip port services to build safer communities. Based on our long-standing active partnerships, our current focus is in Cape Town, South Africa, and in Bali, Indonesia. Our anti-trafficking response team's work experience include business continuity operations, training, ports monitoring, investigation and conflict resolutions, survivor rehabilitation and case management, anti-trafficking activism, and trauma-informed care. Freedomports Alliance also provides training for key stakeholders, and we promote multi-industry stakeholder collaboration within the airports communities. We collect data to identify trends, which include modus operandi and possible hot flights. Hot flights are flight routes and or carriers where passengers vulnerable to human trafficking are most often identified. Check-in staff briefings is when we remind passenger-facing staff of verified human trafficking modus operandi before passengers check in, so that they know what to look out for. Moreover, the presence of an anti-trafficking airport response team at the check-in counters reassures the check-in staff that they are not alone. We extract information from our daily reports and watch list reports, and we analyze it so that airport stakeholders remain informed. Despite the fact that that airport stakeholders in Cape Town International Airport valued the impact of our work, we always feel there is so much more we can do to reduce the vulnerability of human trafficking and to reduce the risk of re-trafficking. The urgency to weave a global safety net is conducive to make mitigating human trafficking in airlines and airports mandatory. Anti-trafficking organizations exist to serve those vulnerable to human trafficking and are dependent on government agencies and their partnerships to intervene, investigate, arrest, and prosecute human trafficking. Next slide, please. Therefore, government agencies are often the most important role players and they are the axle that determine the impact anti-trafficking movement has. So when we look at this case study, Graham and Pierre are our two team members who pioneered the work in Cape Town Airport. It was not easy to launch something from which there was no guideline, there was no blueprint. However, there were immigration officials who helped them figure out best practices according to the layout of Cape Town's airport. So before we get into the statistics, let's watch this video clip that shows the route a victim of labor trafficking who we identified in Cape Town Airport took. You will notice this man's journey started in Bangladesh. From there, he moved on to Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. He entered Indonesia through Bali Airport. He then traveled to South Sumatra. He exited Indonesia through North Sumatra after being exploited as a construction worker. He then returned to Kuala Lumpur. From there, he moved to Cape Town and transited in Ethiopia. In Cape Town, this is where we identified him. He traveled through 7 airports where nobody picked up that he was traveling on someone else's passport. And the reason for sharing this with you is not to point fingers at anyone, but to show you the extent of the routes traffickers will use to maximize their return on investment from a victim that they are exploiting. After we identified this man and started engaging with him, it became apparent that he was traveling on someone else's passport. So how do we know that? His jawline differed from the man in the passport photo. And he got the date of birth wrong multiple times. So when we move on to look at the statistics and the impact that we had in Cape Town Airport, over a period of 1 year, the impact of our small team in a relatively small international airport allowed us to intercept 74 possible victims of trafficking, of which 15 were minors. Can you imagine if we had the support and financial and human resources report to screen more flights and to have more members on the ground? In each case, we presented the trafficking indicators to the senior official on duty, who made the decision whether the person should be called into an interview room or not. The 60 to 80 men per week refers to the men who disembark in Cape Town Airport to board the commercial fishing trawlers in Cape Town Harbour. The exploitation and the inhumane conditions these men experience is just unheard of. Engaging with these men as they disembark in groups of 10 to 15 remains a concern because they are young, can hardly speak English, and there is no time to make them aware of the dangers of human trafficking. When government agencies and corporate companies partner with anti-trafficking organizations, the power of collaboration enables us to do so much more than what we are able to do and accomplish individually. Now let me hand over to my friend Graham. Next slide, please.
Well, hi, everybody, and thank you again for this opportunity that you've given us as Freedomports Alliance to just present some of our findings and some of our on-the-ground experience. And that's the perspective that I would like to speak to you about. And this is really just confirming what Francesca's research has shown us about the major need for trained and equipped frontline staff to be able to really make a difference when it comes to anti-trafficking in the context of airports and airlines. And a few key responses that we as Freedomports Alliance have identified or come across in our time on the ground have really brought us to a point of realizing what is it that we actually need to be doing. So firstly, we recognize that there is a dire need for frontline workers to understand trafficking and in all its complexity. And this being done from a common base of knowledge, from a common base of how it works out, because a lot of people have understanding to a certain point, have knowledge of a certain kind, and they kind of operate out of that. And doing that, you know, operating like a silo, and as Anita said, the collaboration is needed instead of the silo approach, so that we can all actually be moving in the same way, in the same direction, and not all relying on our own interpretation or understanding of this atrocity. Another response that we identified was in the context of contributing to the effectiveness in the airport of stopping trafficking, and that being presented in the fact of data verification. You know that the data verification is such an important role. In many respects, it serves as the last line of defense for some folk, and could be the difference for those folk of either becoming a victim of human trafficking or not. And we have seen this happen in a number of different occasions where verification of documents wasn't accurately done, wasn't clearly done, wasn't done in light of human trafficking, but more just in what procedure says needs to happen in the various departments and in the various contexts. A third area that we recognized was the fact that for many of the frontline stakeholders, when they come across a potential victim of human trafficking, they all have their kind of approach and what they should do and how they should do it. And what one department would do would be very different to maybe what another department would do. Another department might not even really know what they need to do in that context, because it's not something that they're used to. So one of the criteria or one of the issues that we as Freedomports Alliance have also recognized is that as an organization, we're there to support those very role players, those very departments, and help facilitate that process. And part of the situation is that a number of these departments aren't familiar with people like Freedomports Alliance or organizations that can help them take that process right through from where this person is firstly identified, and then help them facilitate it to the right channels so that they can give the potential victims or possible victims the support that they need, and effectively handle the case. Another response that we recognized and identified was just how vulnerable the airports actually are. And the misinformed or the uninformed frontline workers who maybe aren't cognizant of the complexity of human trafficking, in many respects contributes to a lot of those issues that Francesca's research was talking about, those inhibiting factors of people not confidently knowing how to deal with a particular case of trafficking. And so from that perspective, traffickers see this, they see the vulnerability of these airports, and then of course they exploit them completely. Because who wouldn't want to enter into a low risk environment with a high return on the investment that they're going through? So a lot of that kind of scenario are the things that we came across as we identified them. And then of course, with all of these responses that are needed all in place, traffickers are also very good, that's their business, in coercing people into various things. And so for many of these traffickers, they would coerce various people to help them, people who are uninformed, people who are maybe vulnerable within the various role players and stakeholders in the airport, to entice them to facilitate the movement across their borders, across the borders of the folk that they were exploiting. And they really do and are able to recognize cracks and weaknesses in the security infrastructure, and so exploit those scenarios. So into this context, what do we do as Freedomports Alliance? Well, we've developed skills-based training, which was founded on the front line as we worked with the stakeholders and agencies in the airport. Our operational approach takes 5 main areas. Our first approach comes from a place of compassion and love for the potential victim, where we identify that the folk are possible victims of human trafficking, and just express to them how much they matter, how much they care. And we make sure that whatever happens, as Anita alluded to, we are always engaging with these possible victims from a trauma-informed position. Once we've done that, we have a second kind of approach of our operational process, and that would be where we've responded in the the second aspect of our approach is where we actually connect with the authorities on the front line in the airports. And by building relationships with them, we're able to create avenues of communication. And it's through these very communication channels that we're able to pass on information after engaging with some of the possible victims, and being able to, from that initial conversation, that initial how are you doing, what's happening, as we engage with the victim, that leading to a more in-depth interview, and then being able to glean whatever we can about that person's case and situation, passing it on to the agencies who we work with, the law enforcement agencies. And by doing this, they then can take that information, which we've used one of our tools called the Red Flag Passport to establish. They take it to their security structures and basically take the process to the next level. And all along that process, we as Freedomports Alliance would be able to work that case with them, help them take on the case and assist them in whatever way we can to really build a workable case that would have the end result that that perpetrator involved in that situation would be the, given their sentence and be prosecuted. The third endeavor that we work with is where we partner with the airlines to try and ultimately save them money by helping them and empowering them through various training platforms to be able to know what the inadmissible passenger, to deal with the inadmissible passengers in terms of the number of fines that airlines pay for those very passengers. So basically, if we are offering the capacity and the skill set which we have to work with the ground staff, to work with the check-in staff, to work with the boarding staff, this training equips and empowers those very frontline people to identify when there's potential cases of human trafficking, to then take that information, to basically put it into the into their channels, go to their various management levels, and basically take those findings and be able to come up with a recommendation for the way forward. And when these things are being done on that very front platform, where those staff are engaging with the folk from the first step of the entrance into the airport, we're able to help them build those cases and be able to recognize those potential victims of trafficking. And of course, that in essence helping the airlines not let through those passengers who would possibly be inadmissible passengers. Then the fourth element of the solution is one that impacts the reporting of the various government departments. We help build the capacity so that when reports are written and people are informed and people know how to look out for what they look out for, there is an empowering and an equipping of these folk to identify human trafficking, so that when they write their reports, the information's accurate, the information about screening the passengers and the communications with the senior officers and all of those channels are flowing smoothly, so that as we collate the data, as we analyze it, as we map it, we get a more accurate picture of the statistics which are actually happening on the ground. And of course, having accurate statistics results in an authentic report, which can then obviously lead to us having an accurate reporting in place when it comes to these kinds of situations, both locally, regionally, and globally. Another tool we have that Anita also alluded to is called the watch list. And what the watch list is basically a tool we use where through our interviewing and through our engagement with people, we may not suspect that there's actually enough evidence that there is a case of trafficking in progress. However, this watch list helps us to continually monitor what happens with that case so that we can use it to build into a case should we need to at a later stage. And then basically the final part of the solution which we would like to suggest is that the more teams that there are trained and actively responding in airports, the more airports are going to be strengthened, the more airports are going to be made aware of this is an airport that trafficking doesn't happen at because of our awareness, because of our fight. And like that, traffickers are going to be forced to reroute. And the more traffickers are forced to reroute, the more they have to spend, the less their actual finances that they generate from the situation are. And at the end of the day, from being a low risk, high return on investment, that situation can be changed with fighting airports, with airports that are equipped and strengthened to turn that whole scenario to a high risk scenario, leading to a low, return on investment for the trafficker. And then, yeah, maybe the next slide, please.
Okay, go.
Yeah, the next slide. Sorry, we've missed the slide.
Okay, Graham, I'll cover this one. Okay. So why an airport needs an anti-trafficking project? To equip port stakeholders with the knowledge, the skills, and the tools needed to proactively respond to human trafficking in a trauma-informed manner. The second goal is to share the responsibility because the airport response team sole focus is to support their operations and focus on identifying human trafficking. The third goal is to link airport stakeholders to ensure human trafficking does not happen in that port. The next slide, please. So airports exist to provide the infrastructure airlines need to order in order to meet the demand from people who want to travel to and from a port. Furthermore, an airport exists to facilitate safe travels. Next slide, please. So when we look at airports communities and what Graham has described before, collaboration allows us to build safer communities. And I would like Graham to continue with the airport communities, please.
Yeah, an important aspect of an airport response team is to recognize that within the airport environment, it is an airport community. You can see from the slide that there's many different parts of the airport that a passenger is going to be moving from, either on a departure or an arrival into a certain airport. And there's going to be a number of stakeholders that they actually will be going through. And as an airport response team, as we look at this big picture of the airport community, it's important to recognize that through and through, each of these avenues, each of these sections of the airport play a major role in the creating a safe environment for that particular airport. So at the end of the day, you can see that some of the main stakeholders that we're talking about here, or the main areas of the airports, are the outside port area, when someone's either approaching or leaving the airport. There's the public area where everybody is actually, going around doing their business, moving from one place to another. There's then the restricted area where only those traveling will be be coming in or going out of the country. And then there's the airport apron where things can happen over there, and then the in-flight where things can happen. And if all of these folk are actually equipped and are made to be aware of the realities of human trafficking, that whole airport will become a much safer community. And one of our goals is to actually work in each of these sections to say, what is that person's contribution to making that airport a safer community? Next slide, please. So then, in closing off this section of my presentation, I'd like to issue us all with a call to action. We need to realize that to fight the scourge of the atrocity of human trafficking, we all have a role to play. It's not whose job is it, it's all of our job to all play our role. Experts have agreed that now is the time for airports and airlines to make their role, make their role in the fight against trafficking count and make it a priority. And this shift needs to be launched, as I've said by a number of speakers already, from top management structures and work its way right through. So the only way that we're going to take ground in this global epidemic is through proactive, multidisciplinary action where all stakeholders fight together for the benefit of all. Because the magnitude of this collaboration will result in an airport becoming known and being sold out for the business of freedom. As at Freedomports Alliance, we can arrange specialized training for you and assist you in the fight of human trafficking. So let's have a further conversation. Let's see how we can assist you to fight this fight better, to be more equipped to fight this fight. If you are part of security, crime prevention, let's train you. And, you know, if you're already in the anti-trafficking field, share our expertise with your peers. And if you're in government, why not try and roll out a compulsory training for all officials? And then, of course, in the corporate sector, both in the airport and out the airport, let's work towards the drive and help create the business of freedom. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Graham, and thank you to all of our speakers. I have been busy monitoring the chat. We have a lot of questions that have come in, so I'm going to attempt to direct these to the appropriate speaker, but if you guys have any thoughts and you'd like to jump in, please feel free to. So first off, a question for Francesca. So you put together the report for the Mekong Club before the COVID-19 pandemic. Have you seen how the conditions have changed related to this issue and airlines as a result of COVID? Have things gotten better? Have things gotten worse? What are your thoughts?
Thank you. That's a very obviously timely question and one well worth considering. So first of all, if you look at COVID, it's really affected our lives on a scale I haven't seen for that for a long time globally. So whenever you have geopolitical or socioeconomic factors which fluctuate, then you are going to increase the likelihood of people being at risk. If you increase the likelihood of people being at risk, then you're going to increase the likelihood of exploitation being successful. So in that regard, we are looking at possibly an increase in terms of human trafficking, in terms of the amount of victims which could be affected. So COVID will have that effect. If we look from the traffickers' point of view, COVID, I don't think will blunt their determination to run their business. This is a business which is highly adaptable. So it will be an obstacle, but one that I'm sure they would account for. So for example, if they are looking to think, okay, how can I get around the fact that travel's just got a bit harder, they might push that financial cost or that personal cost across onto the victim. So perhaps increase debts. So my point is traffickers are going to be will take advantage of any situation that comes their way. So that you've got that kind of idea. However, when we turn to the actual research itself, I would say that the research is evergreen. And I mean that in the sense that it's not going to be influenced too much by that external market force. Rather, the findings are quite clear cut. There are action inhibitors, there are action motivators, there are things which should be put in place if you are going to increase the likelihood of successful frontline intervention. So that's there, and that will remain the case. So when we look at the kind of the next step from the research, which was to suggest that airlines get together to discuss if and how to go forward with it, that's when COVID does also play an impact. So if we have airlines that are under financial distress, then you've got to, from a commercial point of view, think, what is the likelihood that they're going to have resources available to dedicate towards this if it's not already a priority? So unfortunately, with COVID, it could make them reassess how much emphasis they put on this. If they're failing as a business, then they're not going to be thinking, what can I do to change protocol at the moment? But that doesn't mean that airlines can't actually use this opportunity going forward, because as we've just said, human trafficking is not going to go away because of COVID. If anything, it's going to increase. And in that research, I highlighted the various reasons why airlines should care about this. Well, this is going to increase a lot of the pressure points for them. So although it might not be a financial and commercial priority at the moment, it is still actually an increased priority. So it's a very complicated, but at the same time clear-cut idea of what needs to be done. So I hope that answers your question a little bit. Obviously, it's not black and white, but COVID definitely does have an impact.
Thank you so much. No, certainly it's a ever-changing situation and something that we're constantly keeping our eye on here at the Mekong Club. So next up, I have a couple of interrelated questions for Anita. So Anita, you mentioned trainings, you mentioned some data and reports. So we've had a couple of questions asking where listeners can find the latest data and reports on red flags and indicators. And additionally, what kind of languages are available when it comes to the trainings that you guys have available?
Well, first of all, our number one source of information is reading through the annual TIP report, and we really digest that. The second thing is, as coalitions in our various countries and provinces and states, we share information and data. So that's another form. If we look at working in an airport, you automatically identify your hot flights and the trends, and you gather that information from the amount of flights you screen, the amount of passengers that you identified who were possibly vulnerable to trafficking, the amount of people that you have interviewed, the amount of people that law enforcement return to their country or their port of origin. So those are all the statistics that we use to determine the trends and to verify the trends. And what we do with this information as we extract them and analyze them is we submit it and we make it available to airline managers, their check-in staff, as well as the law enforcement agencies in the airport, so that they are more alert as to what is happening. And this all comes down to collaboration, collaboration, and collaboration. Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, regarding the training, sorry, that aspect of it, everyone's most welcome to contact us at our email address, contact@freedomportsalliance.com, that you will show. Thank you for putting that on the screen. And we can engage with you and see how we can arrange tailor-made training for you and your company. As far as languages are concerned, at present, our material and our training is available in English, and it has been translated into Bahasa Indonesia. If anyone else wants to partner with us and has the need to have it translated, we can work directly with you on the needs for that.
Thank you so much. I'm conscious of time and want to be respectful of people's time. So I will pose one more question to Graham and one to Matt. And I know there's a couple of questions that might go unanswered, but we'll make sure that we follow up with you individually if we don't get to reach your question today. So Graham, a question for you, if you please. So have you guys considered forced labor on site within airports? So maybe cleaning staff, baggage staff, or within airline supply chains. Have you ever come across this? Have you thought to address this? What are your thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, so I think one of the key responses to this topic or to this question would just be answering that relationships are absolutely crucial. Because remember, when you're working at the airport, you're actually coming into contact with lots of different people at lots of different levels of various employment. And the more people get to know that you're an anti-trafficking organization that's fighting trafficking, and the more you're getting word out there, the more people start identifying, hey, I'm finding myself in this situation. So they would be given that opportunity to come and talk to you, to come and speak to you. At this point, we haven't yet come across this situation in the airport. We haven't spent a lot of time on it, but we have spent a lot of time developing relationships with various people and getting word out there of what we do at the airport, so that people know that if they have anything related to trafficking, that they can come and speak to us about. And we would hope that through that kind of a platform, those types of disclosures would happen. But we haven't as yet had any specific cases.
Thanks, Graham. Okay, finally, Matt, I will turn to you. So as an NGO, what would be a good approach to engage the governments, engage the airlines, without them feeling like they're being attacked or feeling like we're trying to sabotage their business?
Baby steps. Starting off with discussions to help them to understand the issue, follow that up with some kind of training and presentations that are given off to both the corporations, the airlines, and the government, then bringing individuals from within those communities who have an interest and a heart for this particular activity together to talk about this, to debate and discuss, and to do it in such a way that you take into consideration, you know, the fact that we don't want this to be a negative thing that puts tremendous pressure that goes beyond what they are able to put in place. Now, what we've seen, and we've seen this in the hospitality sector, is that there's often a kind of a systematic process that the hotels have to go through in order to accept the idea of identifying nefarious activities that takes place, having a procedure, a process, trying it out, and so forth. The same needs to happen with the airlines. What we're talking about here is people in terrible circumstances or potentially entering into terrible circumstances. So as human beings, we should care about this simply because it's the right thing to do. But at the same time, what we've seen is situations where airports or airlines taking on this issue and doing the right thing and that kind of getting out into the press, this has a positive impact. You know, people become very kind of excited about the fact that the airports are doing something. The airlines care. They're addressing an issue that is extremely important. And so it's not only a drag on like these companies, it can also be an opportunity to show that companies care, that governments care. And I guess the last thing I'll say is that, you know, at the end of the day, there's 40 million people in modern slavery. 25 million of them are in forced labor, 4.8 million forced prostitution cases, and so forth. The number of people that are helped annually is about 108,000, which is 0.2% of the victims. For us to be able to make a difference, we need everyone to get involved, to follow on what Graham said, to have people from all different sectors, all different walks of life, accepting the fact that freedom is essential and important, has to be in place. In 2021, we shouldn't have a situation where all these people are disenfranchised. The airlines have a role to play. The airports have a role to play. Passengers have a role to play. Law enforcement has a role to play. We need to find a way of linking all these things together so that these people are protected. And with that, I'll just say thank you very much for your time, for participating in this activity. I want to thank all the panelists for participating. If there's any follow-up that you need, feel free to kind of look at the information that's on that was on a few moments ago, contact us. We're happy to answer this. We consider this to be a very relevant and important topic. And once again, we really appreciate you participating in this webinar. Thank you so much.
Thank you.